Hello, everyone. Hello. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to this evening's lecture by Congressman Tim Ryan. Everybody's in the right spot? Yeah. Okay. My name is Amishi Jha. I am an associate professor in the Department of Psychology within the College of Arts and Sciences here on the Coral Gables campus of the University of Miami. And it's wonderful to see all of you here tonight. I think we're in for a real treat. I wanted to say just a few words about kind of the organizing structure that brings us here today. So this lecture is actually part of a larger series of lectures we call the UMindfulness lecture series. And UMindfulness is a campus-wide initiative that is across multiple campuses, actually, and multiple departments and colleges. And it started out as Scott Rogers from the School of Law and myself within psychology coming together, and now I'm so happy to report that we've got folks from music, from the School of Medicine, from nursing, from the Wellness Center, from the Counseling Center, from the Business School, from the School of Education. So we're seeing ourselves take root in many different areas of the university. And this lecture series is part of a larger thrust of support that we've received very generously from Mrs. Maria Kluge, who I'm very happy to say is here with us tonight. So let's give her a round of applause. Woo-hoo! And our hope is to continue meeting like this as a community interested in the topic of mindfulness. So I'm going to actually hand it over to my colleague, Scott Rogers, so he can tell us a little bit about Congressman Ryan, who we'll hear from tonight. Thank you.
So welcome. It is a real delight to be here with you all and to have us coming together again and again to explore this subject of mindfulness with wonderful speakers. And tonight we're in for a real treat. I do want to say I had lunch today with a friend of the university and of UMindfulness, Ian and Jill, who said that they were in Boston where they had the opportunity to see Amishi interview the Dalai Lama, and that it was a fabulously rich and meaningful exchange. And so I hope there's a video that comes out of that, and we'll get that on the UMindfulness site. But thank you, Amishi, for all you do globally, nationally, and of course here at the University of Miami. We're honored, privileged to have Congressman Tim Ryan here today. He was here several years ago. He responds to the invitation, the call to share mindfulness when Mindful Kids Miami introduced him. And in affiliation with the university, we were at the Story University. You talked beautifully about mindfulness. You gave us a real introduction and deep immersion in some ways into the practice and how to bring it into our lives. I'm looking forward to what you offer us today. Thank you for coming back, because this is a conversation that needs to be told over and over with more and more people as the momentum and the interest grows. Thanks very much to you and one of the things that you've offered us in your journey. As you may know, Congressman Ryan is a member of the House of Representatives. He became a member. He was elected in 2002 at the age of 29. At that time, he had already gone to law school. He was already a member of, I believe, the state legislature. And he is now in his 6th consecutive term. So he has figured something out. He gets it. And people get him. And he serves on the very important and prestigious House Appropriations Committee, in the House Budget Committee. He's on numerous caucuses, including the Military Mental Health Caucus. So he has specific interest in mindfulness and in mental health and well-being at across society in its most perhaps richest and most tender environments. He has also started a caucus called the Quiet Caucus, where, as you may know, Mondays and Thursdays, members of Congress, along with staffers, are invited to sit in quiet contemplation. Yeah, right, wow. And it's said that during those moments across the country, people spontaneously go, oh, something significant is happening. And so please keep this up, because we need more of those moments. He's the author of a book, A Mindful Nation: How a Simple Practice Can Help Us Reduce Stress, Improve Performance, and Recapture the American Spirit. And in it, he provides us with an introduction to mindfulness. If you're not new to mindfulness, it's a wonderful reminder of the deep insights of mindfulness practice, of his journey with mindfulness, and how it is that he feels and introduces us in ways that we can grapple with the science and the practice of mindfulness to bring it into our lives, and perhaps a tool and a vehicle to help transform society in the ways that I think many of us have an idea how that might play out. He also is the author of a book that just came out called The Real Food Revolution: Healthy Eating, Green Groceries, and the Return of the American Family Farm. And so there's something about the two titles that I just would like to point out because I think it's significant. The first, A Mindful Nation, how a simple practice can help us reduce stress, improve performance, and recapture the American spirit. The Real Food Revolution: Healthy Eating, Green Groceries, and the Return of the American Family Farm. Recapture and return. The mindfulness practice is very much a practice of inviting us to refine, reclaim, right? Re-experience, to come to know our true nature, that which we have to offer, our gifts, our talents, are already here. But something in this being human, in a wonderfully interesting way, can get in the way. And the mindfulness practice offers us an opportunity to recapture, to return to that knowing. So please join me in welcoming a wise and compassionate man who has offered us a great deal of this path to re-knowing ourselves.
Not many times does a congressman get introduced as being wise. So I thank you for that, first and foremost. You didn't have to laugh at that. That was not a joke. It's great to be here. Personally, I have a long-standing affinity for the University of Miami, and we have a great connection where I'm from in my congressional district and where I grew up. The great quarterback, Bernie Kosar, right? Bernie is from my congressional district, and I grew up and played football myself, and underneath my jersey, and I was a quarterback, underneath my jersey, I had a Bernie Kosar jersey that I wore for every game, and my mom always had to make sure your Bernie shirt's clean. You're going to be all right this week, you know. And I grew up Catholic, so she would strap medals to my pads and Saint this and Saint this and Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travel, and I was covered. So it's great to be here, and I'm very thankful to Amishi and Maria for making this happen. This is an amazing place with such amazing stuff happening. And, you know, a lot of people ask, how's a congressman get into mindfulness? And I have this story that I tell. It must have been 3 or 4 years ago. We were in New York City, and there's a great magazine out called Mindful Magazine, and they were a sponsor of this event, and the Center for Mindfulness at UMass was a sponsor of this event. And it was called Creating a Mindful Society. And I was a guest speaker, and it was in New York City, and I came in on Friday night, but I wasn't speaking until Saturday night, so I showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, and, you know, I'm just kind of walking around. Other people were talking. It's in this big theater, and I run into this young woman who I knew who worked for one of the scientists. We started talking a little bit, and then her sister came over, and her sister wasn't into mindfulness at all, but she was in New York City to go shopping. Doesn't make her a bad person. So she's at this event. So I start talking to the sister who I didn't know, and we're going back and forth, and finally everything breaks up, and we walk outside, and a bunch of us are gonna go down the street and grab a beer and a sandwich and just kind of hang out. We're all in New York, so it's pretty exciting. And it starts to rain, and it starts to rain really hard, so we start running down the street. And then a huge cloudburst, even bigger, comes. So we all duck in to get out of the rain. So I end up under this little awning, and the two sisters end up in this parking garage. And they start talking. And the sister who I just met says to the sister that I have known, was that a congressman that I just met at this mindfulness conference? And she said, yeah. A United States congressman? And she said, yeah. And he practices mindfulness? She's, yeah. And he wrote a book about mindfulness? Yeah. And she asked, will he still be a congressman once the book comes out? So you're not alone if you think this is kind of an odd connection. But I grew up, as I mentioned, Catholic. And growing up, I had my mom, my grandparents a lot, were always praying the rosary. And it wasn't for show at the church, it was, I would ride my bike. They lived a couple blocks down from us. I'd ride my bike to their house in the summer and go in the house. They were Italian, so, there was always some good food usually at the house. But the radio would be off, the TV would be off, and they would be sitting in their living room praying the rosary. And I remember that feeling of going into that house, how just completely peaceful it was. And the older I get, the more I look back and I remember these things that I didn't really write about in a book, but these memories keep coming back of like, how do you end up being a congressman who writes a book and promotes mindfulness meditation and all these other things? And it was that feeling, I think, that I got from them and from their home. And then I learned centering prayer, which was a Christian-based meditation, mantra-based, where you'd take a couple words out of the Bible and repeat them over and over and over again. And then flirted on and off with all kinds of different types of meditation throughout my entire life. And then in 2008, I went on a 5-day, I got into Congress. Ohio is like Florida, right? Presidential years, it's like you don't even want to turn the TV on. And I know you just had a big race here. I was down in Tampa a couple weeks ago, and it was like, 3 o'clock infomercials on, and here comes a gubernatorial ad, It's like spending a lot of money. Ohio's very much like that. So I would run around the state, campaign for my friends who were running statewide and statewide elections for senator, for governor. I went from the minority in the House to the majority. I got on the Appropriations Committee. I had to worry about my own district. Things got more and more hectic for me, fundraising and all the other stuff. And then in 2008, I was 35, and I felt like, I'm going to be burnt out by the time I'm 40 years old. And I really don't want to be a burnt-out 40-year-old congressman. Like, that's not on the hopes and dreams list, When I grow up, I want to be a burnt-out congressman. That'd be great. And I knew the days that I practiced meditation, all different kinds, that I had a higher level of focus and concentration. I was more relaxed, less stress, and I felt like I was genuinely a nicer guy. Other people may take issue with that, but I felt like I was a nicer guy. And I knew the days I did it, I was like that. And I just said, if I'm going to have a daily practice, I'm going to need to go on a retreat. And I did a retreat or two for a day or 2 days on a weekend. And so I went on a retreat for 5 days. John Kabat-Zinn was the leader of the retreat. It was called The Power of Mindfulness. So, as you know, may or may not know, mindfulness is a practice where you try to ground yourself in your body and in the present moment. The best thing to ground yourself in the present moment is the thing that's ever present, and that's your breath. So your mind will go off to the future. Your mind will go off to the past, what I should have done, what I want to do, how I could have done things differently. And mindfulness is about coming to the present moment, grounding yourself in your breath. Mind goes back off, come back. So this is what John taught us at the beginning of the retreat. No matter what, come back to your breath. Don't judge it. Don't judge what you're thinking about. Just come back to your breath. And you sit there, and the retreat was like 45 minutes on a cushion doing that. And then you do a walking meditation for 45 minutes where you'd walk and do the same thing. Back to your breath, back to your breath, back to your body. So that's, in essence, the mindfulness practice. Very simple, pretty simple, but it's difficult. It's not easy. So the retreat was about doing this. And you got to practice it. I mean, this isn't just I'm going to sit here and zone out and hope that I have some benefit. That's like going to the gym and like you walk around, you look at the weights, There's the elliptical over there. There's the treadmill, looking good. Let me get a towel. Where's the water? And I get a little water, and you got all your gear on, you're ready to go, but you never lift any of the weights, right? So mindfulness, you got to practice. You got to do it. So this retreat was about isolating yourself in a kind of a container where you can really learn how to do this. And so over the course of the 5 days, John would introduce more and more extended periods of silence. So it wasn't just, so we'd do the 45 minutes, and then we would talk and, what's going on. And then he'd say, okay, so we're going to leave here tonight. This was the first night or day or two. It's 5 days. He said, okay, we're going to leave here tonight. No talking. So the whole, you didn't have a BlackBerry, like you checked your BlackBerry at the door. No calling home to your mommy if you got scared. No journaling, just you and trying to understand what was going on in your own head. So he would say, okay, you leave here tonight, don't talk to anybody. We're going to come in tomorrow morning, don't talk to anybody. We're going to sit, blah, 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 don't talk to anybody. And, go through breakfast, don't talk to anybody. And then we'll come back and we'll see what that felt like, having all those interactions, because you're in a cafeteria with 70 people and you're not talking to them. That's pretty weird. Imagine going to the cafeteria at school and not talking to anybody. So we get in there, and I remember being there, your mind starts to just starts to calm down, because you're not, okay, who's texting me? Who's on my Twitter account? Who Facebooked me? Who's calling me? And then how about this one? When you call someone and they don't call you back, you start thinking about why they didn't call you back. Did I say something to them that made them upset? Or was I supposed to call them back? Or you create these stories in your head. And so when you're all by yourself for 5 days, you start to see this play out in your own mind. So you really gain an understanding of what it is that you think about all the time that makes your stress level so high. So I remember being there I think it was at the lunch, and things were calm, and maybe it was the breakfast. We're all sitting there, and you can just start to hear things that you normally don't pay attention to. So you're in the cafeteria, and someone puts their chair in. You hear, "Drick, drick, drick." You hear the fork and the knife, like on the plate. Ting, ting, ting. You hear. And then I remember getting a cup of coffee, and I see my cup of coffee is in front of me. And there's all this steam coming out of my coffee. And I remember just sitting there going, wow. Look at all that steam coming out of my coffee. It's twisting around and making all these designs. And I thought, does that happen every morning? And I'm like spaced out and I miss it? And the answer is yes. And then you start thinking, well, what else is happening in my life? Where you get in the car, you pull out of the driveway, you got your commute to work or wherever, and you just end up at work, pulling in the parking lot. You don't remember what the hell just happened for the last 20 minutes, right? That's mindlessness. And there may be a time and a place for you to sit and daydream and think and all that, but most of the time, especially when you're driving a car, it's a good idea to be paying attention. So you really start to recognize this. And over the course of that 5 days, we had really interesting interactions. And I remember this one couple that was there. I still laugh when I think about them. They were living together in this retreat house. They were in the same room. And I remember after another silence. So we went from that period, then he extended it. We did another extended period of time that was, almost like 3/4 of a day or whatever. And I remember the couple comes back, and John sits us in a big circle, and he says, so anybody got any interesting interactions that were happening? And there was a couple funny little stories, and then this couple started talking, and the guy says, I didn't like it. And he said, well, why not? Well, I thought my wife was mad at me. I'm like, why? Why would she, no one's talking. He said, I could swore she was mad at me, and my stress level got up, and John says to the wife, were you mad at him? And she says, I don't know what he's talking about. Like, no, I'm not mad at him. And he starts, as he's talking, he realizes the only time him and his wife are in a confined space and not talking to each other is when she's mad at him. And so it's just interesting, like these things that come up and how you project what you think into a situation that isn't real. You just made it up. You just made it, and not only did you make it up, you made it up and then you really believed it. Right? I mean, you could swear to God that happened. She was mad at me. I could tell the way she was looking at me, you know? And I go, oh, man, this is really... So the whole week was about gaining these little insights, these little understandings. There was 2 people that were in the cafeteria by themselves. And they weren't talking because it was one of these extended periods of time. So the one guy is looking at the other guy, and now we're talking about this afterwards. He says, well, John says, well, what were you thinking? He says, I was looking at this guy across the cafeteria, and I thought, wow, is he a good meditator? Look at him sitting over there. He's so peaceful. I mean, I'm not a good meditator like that. I'm a bad meditator. I'm here, my mind's wandering. Maybe I'll be like that guy at the end of the retreat. So then John says to the guy who was, you know, the best meditator in America at that point in this guy's mind, he says, so you were sitting over there? He says, what were you experiencing? He goes, I was in a fight with my wife in my head, and I just had this huge argument going on. And this is what this is about. Like, how do you better understand who you are? You've got to pay attention. You've got to spend some time really looking at what emerges, what comes up. What do you think about that may bias a decision that you make, or influence you in a way that you're not aware of, that you would be a little bit helpful if you had a little more awareness and understanding. At the end of the 5 days, right towards the end, I remember doing a walking meditation. We were right by the brook. And I had the experience that my mind and my body were in the same place at the same time. They were synchronized. And it reminded me of being back playing sports when you were in the zone. Anybody ever been in the zone before? I mean, obviously, I wasn't in it a lot, or I'd be accepting a scholarship in front of this crowd for quarterbacking Miami University. But that never happened. But my mind and my body were synchronized. And I thought to myself, you can train your mind to be in the zone. You can train your mind to be in the zone. You can train your mind to be synchronized with your body so that everything is moving in the same direction at the same time. But doesn't that make sense? If your body's going in one direction and your mind's in another direction, you're not harnessing all of the power that you have going in the same direction. You know that James Joyce character, Mr. Duffy, I think is his name. And James Joyce said, he lives a short distance from his body. We all know people, and we're all like that. We live like, my mind's over here, my body's right here. I'm driving to work, I'm in the car, but my mind is a short distance from where I am right now. So this practice is about, I think, giving us the tools that we need to really thrive. And so after I had this personal experience myself, I went up to John Kabat-Zinn at the end of the retreat, and I said, my God, we got to push this out. This is unbelievable. Like, why didn't anyone teach me this in school? Like, this to me should be like the most fundamental thing. Forget algebra and chemistry and all these things. We can teach those down the line. But the most fundamental thing is, how can you teach these kids to focus? They're growing up in a world like this. Their brain will change. I'll let Amishi talk to that, more specifically than I ever could. But your brain is going to change. Your attention span's going to shrink. So if we want to give every kid in America an opportunity to succeed, why wouldn't we give them the skills they need to be successful and to thrive in however they define their own success? But if you can't set a goal and stay on it, then you're not going to be very successful. You're not going to get through high school. You're not going to get through college. You're not going to get through a tough job. And how, as you're trying to achieve that goal, you're going to get knocked off track. How do you muster up the resiliency to stay on track and keep going? And I think that's what this skill can give kids. And when you look at a lot of these kids today, so I read a Mindful Nation celebrating Amishi, celebrating the scientists, celebrating the people who are really going out and doing the work. But so in healthcare, for veterans, and in our schools. So how do we collectively try to figure out how we teach this to our kids and how we get it into our schools so that these kids can have the skill sets that they need? And when you learn more and more about the brain science, you learn how trauma can inhibit your ability to be able to focus, concentrate, access your working memory, be able to make good decisions. If your brain is in fight or flight mode, and we know mindfulness practices, and other practices too, can help get you out of fight or flight mode, why wouldn't we collectively as a society say, this is where we want to put our tax revenue. This is what we want to invest in. This is what we want our schools to do. And how do we research it enough to really be able to tease out how it best works and how it best gets implemented and how we train our teachers to be able to embody this and then pass it along in schools? Why wouldn't we do that? To me, it doesn't make any sense that we would know, and that's what after this retreat and after I knew this and started a daily practice, for me, how was I going to go back and talk about something else? And people say, well, Congressman, isn't that kind of risky? And then when I told my staff I wanted to write a book about this, you should have seen those conversations. So why don't you write a book about, how you got here? I said, I'm 35 years old. You don't write an autobiography at 35. This is something that I felt really passionately about, really strongly about, getting it out. I got into politics to shift things, to change things, to make a difference. And then when you discover something that's able to change in such a deep and fundamental way, I want to be a part of pushing that out and figuring out how we, from a public policy side, make these investments and teach these teachers in school districts how to implement this so that our kids can learn. And to me, that's what's exciting about the research that's happening here at the University of Miami, because I could talk till I'm blue in the face. But if I start talking about what's happening at the University of Miami and how the University of Miami football team is participating in a mindfulness-based program, you want to get a high school student's attention in Youngstown, Ohio, tell them that, right? You tell them that, and they're going to be interested. When you look at what the Marines are doing, they're interested. And that's why we have to collectively practice it, embody it the best we can, but say, how can this change our country? How can this position us as a country to have a higher quality of life, have more happiness, more success, better economy, and all the rest? To me, that's what's really, really important. We only have 313 million people in the United States. That's it. If you go to China, it's 1.3 or 4 billion people. You go to India, it's 1.3 or 4 billion people. And our kids who graduate from Youngstown State University or the University of Miami or Ohio State are competing directly with these men and women in these other countries. And we only have 313 million people. So we better figure out how we get all 313 million on the field wearing the United States of America jersey, helping us compete economically and quality of life and all the rest. And I don't think we're giving kids a fair shot if we just write off entire neighborhoods, entire school districts, and say, well, we're just going to take these good school districts here, and a lot of the good school districts I get invited to go speak to, they have high suicide rates because of the high levels of stress in these schools and these kids thinking if they don't get all A's, they're not going to get into the right college and their life's over. That's not the American way. That's not what we're about. And so this can help many different school districts, all students across the United States. And I think we have an obligation, because we know the science, know the research, know how it can help, have a personal practice maybe, to be able to implement this. And, I think it's something, quite frankly, I don't like to talk politics much when I give these speeches. And don't worry, I won't get too deep. But I do think the country, left, right, Democrat, Republican, we're looking for something new that can potentially work. Not the same old arguments we've been having for 30 years, banging our head against the wall. I have my political positions. I'll talk to you about them after. But I'm thinking, isn't this something that could maybe be really helpful in healing the political divide? You want to talk about empowering somebody, giving them the skills they need to be successful? You want to talk about reducing healthcare costs in the long run? And addressing our long-term budget issues that we have, that healthcare is a primary driver and stress is a big driver of healthcare costs? Do we want to talk about personal responsibility? We're all for it. You got to go out and succeed. Resiliency, the ability to get knocked down, keep going. This is all can be developed through mindfulness type practices. And so why wouldn't we find something like this? It's about community. It's about connecting at a deeper level. But we can't just send people off into the world. I don't know what the world's going to look like in 10 or 15 years. I don't know what the economy is going to look like in 10 or 15 years. If I told you, I'd be lying to you. Who knows what's going to develop in 10 or 15 years? What I do know is we better give our kids the skills they need to go out into that world and be able to compete. More technology, this is not going away, so we would waste our time trying to ban this stuff. The fact that I have it up here is a bad sign, you know what I'm saying? So how do we give them the skills that they need? You look at the veterans who are coming back. 22 vets a day take their own life. 22, going back to Vietnam. 22 a day. So in the time I'm up here speaking, we'll lose a veteran. Somewhere in the United States will take their own life. And the default position now, in so many ways, is how many prescription drugs can we put this veteran with post-traumatic stress on? And I've met a lot who have been on 5, 7, 9, 10, 15 different prescription drugs and still not doing well. I don't know how you could take 15 drugs for anything and be okay. When we know that some of these practices are yielding tremendous benefits, and you get veterans saying things like, after just a few days or weeks of an alternative practice, that I have slept through the night for the first time in 30 years. 30 years. Or 10 years, or I've been able to rehabilitate my relationship with my ex-wife, and I'm finally reconnected back to my kids. In the DC VA, they do have a meditation group, and I went and I sat with these guys, and it's me with a suit and tie, and it's, 10 or 15 Vietnam vets. And to hear these guys talk is unbelievable, because they say these things to me. One guy said we invited him to Capitol Hill, and we had him meditate with Keith Mitchell, who's a former all-pro football player in the NFL. He played for the New Orleans Saints. And Keith meditated with all these guys, and the guy came up to Capitol Hill, and he said, before I started practicing mindfulness, I could not drive on a highway, and I would have never been able to come here. And these are the stories you hear. I think we have an obligation to help push this out. I see these kids in the classrooms that we have. We were able to get a grant for $1 million in 2009, and we implemented mindfulness and social and emotional learning into our schools. And you should see these kids. The superintendent told me this great story last week. I called him up about something else. Well, I want to get gardens in the schools now. I want every school to have a garden. Isn't that be a cool school? You got a garden in every school. You got a kitchen to teach kids how to cook so they know what to eat. And you have a salad bar in every school. And you're teaching the kids mindfulness and how to pay attention and how to focus and how to listen and all the emotional intelligence skills, and you had little art, little music, I think that'd be a cool school to go to. Like, I should have done this for myself back, but I obviously couldn't. And there were two principals. I called him up. I said, hey, what's going on? Da, da, da. He said, well, I got to tell you this story. He said, we had a little issue with the social emotional learning mindfulness thing. I said, what happened? I'm going, oh, God, this is all I need. He said, we had two principals that got in an argument. I said, about what? Well, the one principal, and it was like in October, the one principal, they were reporting their incident reports, like basically, like how many incidents did you have in your school in the first 6-8 weeks, whatever. And the one principal said, I didn't have any incident reports. So the other principal thought she was like cooking the books, right? Okay, you didn't have any incidents, not one. We didn't have any. And that's the school that really we have embedded the social and emotional learning and mindfulness in. This is inner city Warren, Ohio. 50,000 people, 40-some thousand people, older, industrial, multicultural, high poverty rates, high Medicaid, high free and reduced lunch, probably 80-90% if I had to guess. Tough school. And not one incident report, because they have a peace corner in the classroom. So you learn how to identify your emotions, you pay attention. They'll do breathing. I'll walk into the school and the kids will be laying out in like a yoga position on the floor with a belly buddy that they put on their belly. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, focus on your belly, breathe in, breathe. So it's beginning to train their mind to focus on the present moment, be aware of your body. I'll walk in and there'll be 12 kids on the floor doing this. So these kids have to learn how to identify their emotions, and then there's a peace corner in the room. So if they're feeling bad, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, so if I was fidgety or I was causing trouble, or if I was mad or something was going wrong, chances are I would have got yelled at. That would be a good day if I just got yelled at. And these kids are allowed to raise their hand and say, Mrs. Jones, I'm not feeling good. I'm feeling yucky about something. You okay? I'm feeling really angry. Can I go to the peace corner? Kid will go over to the peace corner. And you can meditate, you can write, you can color, you get your stuff together, and then you come back to class. So you're teaching a kid how to handle his emotions or her emotions, not yelling at them for feeling angry. Like, stuff doesn't make anger go away, doesn't make fear go away, but how do you deal with it? And if we want to make the neighborhoods in Warren, Ohio safer and more attractive for investment, then we better teach our kids who live in that neighborhood how to regulate their own emotions, how to de-escalate situations, and that's how you're going to make the neighborhood safe. We could put all kinds of cops on the street. If our citizens don't know how to behave and regulate their own emotional states, then we're not going to have safe neighborhoods. And we could keep doing the same thing. This would be the political argument that at some point I'm going to have with people who are going to say, oh, this guy, he wants to teach kids how to breathe, and they're going to go out in the neighborhoods and make the neighborhood safe. Yeah, they are. What's your idea? More cops, more prisons, more jails, more taxpayer money, $40,000 a year to put somebody in prison? Is that somebody else's idea? Because we tried that, ain't working. So when I do this, I need all you to help me. Like, no, he's right over here. I'm with this guy. The guy who wants him to breathe, I'm with that guy over there. Yeah. So this is how we shift the neighborhoods. And I'll tell you a really cool story about a girl in town who she was in one of these classrooms, and she lost her family in a house fire. Just show you the power of this stuff. Lost her family in a house fire. All her brothers and sisters, like 3 or 4 brothers and sisters, and her parents. She was at her grandmother's house that night. And at 10 o'clock that night, she wanted to go home. And the grandmother said, it's 10 o'clock, I'm not taking you home, you're staying here. And thank God, because she lost everybody, her entire family, in that house fire. So the kid was in this SEL mindfulness classroom. And I'll never forget the guidance counselor telling me this story about this little girl. Now, because of how this program's designed, everybody knows each other. They know their name, they talk every day, they listen, you're allowed to express how you feel. Your brother pushed you in the morning, or you're mad at your mom because she yelled at you in the morning to get in the car. I know that never happens to anybody else. I tell my wife when I hear when I hear our kids and my wife in the morning having a, not heated discussion, but like trying to get people moving out of the house so we can be on time, I sit there and think to myself, this is only happening in about 30 or 40 million other households across America this morning, you know. But this girl, so she didn't go, she's in this SEL mindfulness class, and she was just obviously very, very traumatized. And so she started raising her hand. She'd go to the peace corner. And the guidance counselor said she wasn't a particularly good writer, but she would go to the peace corner and write, and write, and write, and write, and write, and write. And she said this woman, this little girl, just kind of completely turned around. And that week that I went, she said, and next week she is submitting an essay to hospice on suffering. That's powerful. You know, you think of these little, I go in there and I cry. I sit in the back of the classroom. I know there's some dudes in here, but I go in these classrooms and first I laugh because the kids are so funny. And then I cry at some point because I feel like we're giving them exactly what they need to be able to go out in the world and succeed. The emotional intelligence, the social skills, the focus, the concentration, the resiliency, the creativity. This is what we're giving them. And I'm worried that one day, you know, because I cry and then I leave. You know, I'm back there with wiping my tears and then I leave. And I'm worried that, like, when I leave, the kids go, Mrs. Jones, why does the congressman come to our classroom every 6 months, cry, and then leave? You know? But I feel like we're giving them something really special. I want to take a couple questions and happy to chat, but I want to tell you just one last story of why I think this is important. So when I came here 2 years ago, I was with my girlfriend at the time and her 2 kids. Well, a few months later, we got married. So I went from being a single congressman, bachelor, to married with 2 stepkids. And so then we got a house. You know, she moved out of her place, I moved out of mine. We wanted to get a new place, you know, just for ourselves and our new start that we were having. And so we thought, you know, the kids want a dog. I said, all right, let's go get a dog. So like anybody who goes and gets a dog, we come back with 2 dogs. So now I'm go from a single congressman to married, 2 stepkids, and 2 dogs. And then in June, we had a baby of our own, Brady. So now, bachelor congressman, married, 2 stepkids, 2 dogs, new baby. So a few weeks ago, I had this amazing experience in my house. It was about 10:30 at night, and I sat down in the chair, and I looked around, and everyone was in bed. The house was very quiet. It never happens. So I went and I grabbed the remote control to the TV, which I haven't seen in months, because everyone else controls the TV. So I start flicking through the channels, and I get to watch like a sports documentary, right? And it's about the 1993 North Carolina State Wolfpack basketball team. Jim Valvano was the coach. Italian guy. Like, I'm half Italian, so it's like my guy. I remember him growing up. It's like, I love this guy. So they go through the whole thing. And I remember him as a very passionate coach, and he's given this speech on the documentary. And he said, when I was a kid, I heard this guy give a speech, and the guy said, the Lord must have loved ordinary people because he made a lot of us. But every day, ordinary people do extraordinary things. every single day in so many different ways. Ordinary people do extraordinary things. And as I was listening to this, obviously you watch things through your own point of reference. I thought, that to me is what teaching this is about. It's about giving ordinary people the best chance to do extraordinary things. To give them the skills, the tenacity, the resiliency, the creativity, the awareness, the focus to do something extraordinary. And to me, that's what public life is about. You can't pick, you're going to do good, you're going to do good. You can't do all that. But you can create an environment and you can say, this is what we're going to train people to have these skills so that they could go out and do extraordinary things. That's what colleges and universities are about, right? It's about giving kids the skills, the knowledge to go out and do something extraordinary. And I can't think of anything better in my 41 years of reading policy, education policy, healthcare policy, of anything better than to have somebody with the skill set to be able to go out and do extraordinary things. You want to reduce inequality? Let's teach kids in poor neighborhoods the skill sets they need to do extraordinary things. We want to reduce healthcare costs and have more money to invest in the research. Let's teach ordinary people the skill sets they need to do extraordinary things. To me, that's what all this research that Amishi and the University of Miami and all the work that you're doing, and Ms. Kluge, that you're funding, is so vitally important. But at the end of the day, it's about what you're going to do with it when you leave here and what I'm going to do when I go to Washington, D.C., or what I'm going to do back in Ohio. How do we create new systems for opportunity of ordinary people, for ordinary people, to do extraordinary things? And in Washington, D.C., we somehow think that if there's a really complicated problem, very complex, that we need to somehow come up with a more complicated, more complex solution to fix the very complicated problem. And that hasn't really worked out for us either. And I think that the future of our country and the future of public policy and the future direction for our country is, how do we simplify? How do we get back to the fundamentals? And the fundamentals, in my estimation, with the 2 books that I wrote, how do we teach kids how to focus, concentrate, be resilient, be creative, get knocked down, and get back up. This society where everybody gets a trophy, I don't like it. Right? What'd you do? I joined a league. Well, here's your trophy. No, that's not teaching a kid what you need to be successful. You need to get knocked down and earn the trophy. And if you didn't earn it, you got to figure out what you got to do to get better. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think it's mean. I think it's mean-spirited for us to think that somehow we should allow you to think that that's okay. And so as we move forward, these are the kind of things we need to get back to the fundamentals. What kind of food do we eat? And this will be the only elevator pitch for the Real Food Revolution book. We subsidize crops that turn into highly processed food. And we have about half the country in the next few years are going to have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. You want to collapse the healthcare system. You want Medicaid and Medicare to collapse. Let's have half the country have diabetes. And we subsidize it and make all this food really cheap. And then we subsidize the healthcare to take care of the people who are sick because of the highly processed food that they eat that we make cheap and more accessible. So that's the real food revolution, and I will tell you, my mindfulness practice really brought some clarity to that complicated system, that this is food, this is agriculture policies, this is education policies, these are healthcare policies, when in fact, they're all connected. And if we want to give ordinary people a chance to do extraordinary things, we as leaders need to see these systems as connected and make sure we try to address them all in a holistic way. And I think a mindfulness practice can help. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being a part of this great community.
stand up and speak loudly if you don't think you're going to repeat.
Okay, I'll repeat. Yeah,
Hi, so welcome, and thank you so much for coming to Miami.
thank you.
And I loved hearing what you had to say, because mindfulness, to me, is an incredibly simple way to solve many, many complex problems. And I know you introduced legislation to get federal money to pay for social emotional learning programs. That would be part of the core curriculum in every school in America. And to me, that's a huge difference maker. So on the local level or on the state level, what can I do, what can people in this community do that would bring mindfulness and social emotional learning to Miami, to Florida, and to every classroom in the country?
I appreciate that. So how can all of you help bring social and emotional learning and mindfulness into the broader society? And I will say we did get money in. The role, my opinion, for the federal government is to, how do we show that this is something that locals should really try to access? It's not about really, I mean, there's a lot of money that goes in education today, and I don't want to get into a federal local schools deal, but I think the federal government can show through research and pilot programs why local school districts should make this investment and the troubles that it will save them in the long run. I say start where you are, and there's a Mindful Schools Miami. You could talk to Amishi about it. Hey. And get involved with that and support it with resources, money, time, volunteer. I think you start where you are. And I tell people, if you're in the education, start in education with the schools. If you have come from a military background, you're into the military thing, help with military families or help with veterans. Start a group where you can bring mindfulness to military families or to vets with post-traumatic stress. Start where you are. That, to me, that's where your excitement is. That's where your passion is.
I would just like to share some very good news with you and with the audience. And you came last fall and you spoke to a group of 300 people at the business school here on campus. And it was through Mindful Kids Miami. We do have a nonprofit organization here that is getting mindfulness into the public schools. And since then, because Tim Ryan opened the doors for us, there was so much excitement after you were here that things just started happening. And this year, just 3 weeks ago, we had a full-day conference of 425 people who attended here at the University of Miami, and we had the superintendent of public schools speaking.
Wow.
And the vice president of the board was at the table right there, taking notes on everything. Amishi spoke, Scott Rogers spoke. After that, Valerie York Zimmerman, who is the founder of Mindful Kids Miami, was invited to the board, to speak to the board about getting it into the public schools. So Tim Ryan was very
Wow.
in opening this door.
Wow. Thank you. I'll send you a bill. No, okay. That's great news. That's fantastic.
I'd like your email so we can send you a full report of
Okay.
everything that happened after you visited.
Okay.
Great.
You got it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering if that retreat you went to back in 2008, could you maybe describe what it felt like when suddenly it started snowing? I think you were a cop back then. You didn't want to tell people you were a congressman.
Oh, I don't remember. I have this issue when I travel or go somewhere that I don't say I'm a congressman. I'm like a high school basketball coach is my traditional facade that I put on. And they say, "Wow, why'd you get in the back?" I love kids. I love kids. I love coaching kids. That's my line. So if you ever see me somewhere and I don't recognize you, and you go, "Congressman Ryan," and I said, "I don't know who you're talking about."
I think at this one you were saying you were a cop and it was on the last day.
Yeah, I did. I was in complete. I was incognito. Yeah, and then at the end, because I couldn't lie. Like, you were like, I was so grounded you know, and so like I couldn't even, they said, so what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a congressman. And, you know, yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, a congressman would be here, right? Yeah, exactly, yeah. Tell me another one. But yeah, I got so, you know, it was just your guard was down completely. And so, but, you know, that's what happens. So, yeah, we'll do you and then, yeah.
I had a quick question about like the practical issues of like implementing like let's say the peace corner in schools.
Yeah.
So if a kid like raises his hand, is like I want to be in the peace corner all day, would like he or she be allowed to, or like are there limits and stuff?
I think the teachers go through a training and they start to learn how to identify if a kid's just trying to like get out of his homework and whatever. Yeah. Okay, what's the answer number 5, Johnny? And Johnny goes, can I go to the peace corner? You know. Yeah, I think they learn how to do that. Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing about it, which I think is really important, and mindful kids will understand this, the teacher has to embody the practice. You know, because the teacher in many ways can shift the mood of the classroom. If a teacher gets elevated with high levels of stress and they bring that into the classroom, that affects the kids because the kids are bringing their stuff to the classroom too. So how does the teacher, you know, really embody it? And when I went to a practice where they were training the teachers for the Warren City program, it was 4 or 5 days, and I went there on the 4th day. And I talked a little bit, and then the teachers had this globe that they would throw around. It was an exercise that they had, and the teachers were supposed to tell me, you know, how they felt. Linda Lantieri, who runs the program, threw it and says, okay, tell the congressman how you feel about it. I was a little nervous because I got the money and kind of said, we need to do this. And the teacher grabbed it, and one teacher said, I've been waiting for something like this for 30 years in my teaching career. She threw it to another teacher, and the other teacher said, I've started treating my own kids differently just in the 2 or 3 days that we've been here. And threw it to another teacher, and the other teacher says, I feel like I'm born again. And I said, well, calm down. We're, you know, like, it's cool. But they were just sitting for maybe 5 or 10 minutes in the morning and maybe 5 minutes at the end of the day. It wasn't like a retreat like the one I talked to you about. But I think we're all going so fast that it really benefited them significantly. And then the last guy, he said, I was a little squishy. It was a guy. It was a dude teacher. And that's such a Youngstown thing. He's a dude. And I thought, wow, how's the guy teacher feel about this whole thing? And he says, I got to admit, and he was my age. He says, I got to admit. He says, I thought this was a little squishy. And he said that, but then he said, last night I was at my daughter's soccer game. And I was actually at my daughter's soccer game. And I was watching her run, and I thought how old she's getting now, and the sky was blue and the grass was green. He said, it clicked for me. I get this. Like, this is my life here. And he's been one of the best advocates ever since. Now as a principal, pushing it really, really hard. So we'll go last question here.
Thank you. How are the other Congress people taking this mindfulness practice?
I knew I shouldn't have taken this last question. You know? Mm-hmm.
I've been kind of leading one a little bit in the water department myself, but sometimes like people are real enthusiastic, but then sometimes they don't show up to the practice, and then sometimes they do, so it's kind of on and off. But as far as the Congress people go, how are they taking? Like, are they practicing sometimes, or are they talking about it?
Well, we do twice a week when we're in D.C. For members, we do it in the House Chapel, and that's just for members of Congress. Not a great turnout for that, you know, and it's me and another guy usually, and we've had... What's the percentage of 2 out of 435? And so we do it, and then we have a thing for staff where we bring in different teachers. So we bring in mindfulness teachers and people who do yoga and different kind of teachers who teach alternative approaches to veterans, education, whatever. That's for staff. Members can go, but it's for staff. We get 30 to 40 staff members who come in, and I've heard them, talk about in the hallway, like, oh my God, that's so great. I'm going to start doing that all the time. I've had kids, I call them kids now, they're in their 20s, but they'll grab me at the cafeteria. I'm going through the salad bar line or whatever, and they'll say, hey, Congressman, I just really want to thank you for doing that. It's really been helpful. My stress was high, and they'll have a story to tell. And to me, that's important because those are the future members of Congress. Those are the future chiefs of staff of members of Congress. And if we can reach them as well. But I do have members of Congress who, they'll tease me when the book first came out. They'll come over and all the guys are hanging out and they'll tease me for being, the yoga guy or Zen guy or whatever they feel like throwing at me. And then everyone will want, ha, 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 and I'll laugh it off. And then everyone will walk away, and the person who said something always says, what is that stuff you're doing? I think I really need something. My stress level's so high. I'm thinking about not running for re-election again. I can't juggle all this with my family and the fundraising and the job, like quietly. And I'll have people come up and say, my wife read about you in Yoga Journal, or I read about you here, or my daughter teaches yoga. There's it's kind of in their world, but I will tell you, Washington, D.C., and you know this, is a very insulated place, and it's hard to penetrate sometimes, most times. Usually Congress, really, the history of the country is Congress is last to the dance. You look to civil rights, you can look to women's rights, you can, whatever it is, it's like Congress is the last ones to get the memo, So that's why I've spent a lot of time coming to Miami, going to different parts around the country to try to get groups like this to be supportive and to hear about 450 people. I was with a woman today her dad's a labor leader in Youngstown. He says, you got to meet my daughter. She's a yoga teacher in Miami. I said, you got to be kidding me. So I said, next time I'm in Miami, I'm going to call her. Met with her today. Yoga Gangsters. I don't know if you heard of them, right? Terry. So Terry's dad is like my buddy. So anyway, as I walked in here and I saw this crowd, and she told me about an event she had with 500 people to raise money for Yoga Gangsters, and they could teach yoga at juvenile justice halls, schools, prisons. Amazing. She's a phenomenal woman. And then I look at the crowd in here and I think, well, she's getting 500. And here's a couple hundred, and there was 300 at the last event, and then you had one with 450. I'm thinking, just here in Miami, you've got probably 800, 1,000 people who are get it? That's a lot. If you ask me, I'd run a political campaign in Miami right now if I had said, I got 1,000 volunteers. What? I'm in. What do you want me to run for? I'll be at the beach, but I'm going to run, But think about that, 1,000 people in Miami. That's huge. Imagine the network, the neighborhoods, the schools, the money to raise for, say, just schools and the yoga gangsters. You want to transform Miami, I'd place a bet on that. And it gets to your question, too, about what do I do? It's there's a group here of people who can really, and you got the research. You got the research, the yoga, the mindfulness, and 1,000 people. My work here is done. I'm out. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Tim, very, very much. We look forward to seeing you again sometime in the coming years, next evolution of it all. And for those of you who are interested, we have books, and the Congressman will take some time to chat and to sign some books. So thank you all very, very much for coming. Have a wonderful evening.